Welcome to ASEAN Insights, Understanding Southeast Asia, the premier podcast that examines current dynamics defining the region. Brought to you by the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, each episode we will talk with thought leaders who are shaping the future of the region through research, policy, activism, or business. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Lydia Ruddy, the Director of Communications at the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. Today I'm talking with Yasu Ota about his book called 2030, Geopolitics of Semiconductors. Our conversation ranges from issues about decoupling between China and the United States, AI and ethics, the right to privacy, and the impact of the geopolitics of semiconductors on ASEAN and how ASEAN can position itself to best benefit from the current circumstances. Yasu Ota is a Tokyo-based columnist and TV commentator for Nikkei, covering the Asia-Pacific region, covering many issues, including international trade and digital innovation. With 35 years of journalism experience, Yasu has spent more than half of his career as a foreign correspondent in Washington, D.C., Frankfurt, Germany, and Singapore. He is the recipient of the Ban Weda Memorial International Journalistic Prize, an annual award for journalists who have made exceptional international news reports. Yasu has a degree in physical chemistry from Hokkaido University and graduated from night journalism course at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Yasu Ota, I am so happy that you could join me this morning to talk about your new book.
Well, thank you very much, Lydia, having me here. This is the first time to be interviewed by you. Yes, I wrote a book about the semiconductor. Title is 2030, Geopolitics of Semiconductors. That is the title, which I try to depict the structure of global economy, including ASEAN, through the prism of high technology, such as the semiconductor. So let's talk about it.
Great. I would like to start with just a general question. I mean, we know that the United States has just passed a bunch of export restrictions on semiconductors and the technology that enables basically the development of AI. And so can you sort of dig into that a little bit and explain the particular relevance right now of sort of set the stage for the geopolitics of this issue and why it's so important right now?
Right. Yeah. Well, everything has started in era of Trump administration. Mr. Trump, in all of a sudden, started accusing China, saying that China is occupying high technology, especially the telecommunication technology, something called the 5G. 5G is the next generation protocol of telecommunication. And when they look at the picture of the global market, they realize that 70%, 60% of the market share of 5G equipments were dominated by the Chinese makers, particularly Huawei. So the Mr. Trump was angry, right? And so the telecommunication should not be controlled by the Chinese company. So that's why the American government, US government, has imposed a sanction against Huawei and related companies in China. That is the beginning. Why China has a technology? Yes, of course, China is the major technological nation right now. So it is US or Japan even who has to catch up with the Chinese technology. And when it comes to digital technology, China is far, the ability or capability of research and development should not be underestimated. So the U.S. was upset, and Mr. Trump has started that the policy sanction policy, and Mr. Biden has succeeded that direction as well. And what is happening now is because China has a technology, it is possible for China to control all the communication or semiconductor production and AI development, which is not really good for the rest of the world. It should be balanced. The technology should not be dominated by one nation or one company. So that's why the U.S. Imposed a sanction and deeper and deeper. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I think, Biden administration has announced a new major sanction, export restriction measure against China, which includes a long list of the items and technology of export on the list to China. So by doing that, the U.S. is trying to control the technology flow from U.S. to China or from the allied nation to China. So what I'm worrying about is this might end up with being a deeper decoupling between the U.S. and China and the division of the entire global world.
Let me just ask you something I'm not quite, didn't quite understand. So you said that China controls digital technology, essentially. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And that means because of the 5G?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Because, I mean, from my understanding, the United States has the best capacity to design the high-end chips.
Yeah, that is the exact point. It's kind of rude awakening. Everybody, including myself and you, believed in the US is the nation where the most advanced technology is being developed. Yes, it has been like that. But now China is even better than the US in a sense. Looking at the 5G equipment itself, there's a bunch of the advanced technologies in there, semiconductors, algorithm, AI, all the digital new development is employed to make the 5G equipment. And the reality is looking at the market share of the products of 5G, Huawei is the number one. The second comes Nokia and Ericsson is the North European companies, no Americans, no Japanese, right? So this is a reality. So we tend to believe in that the US is far advanced than the other competitors, but the reality does not seem to be so. So that is the things we have to realize. Yeah.
So, but 5G is a communications technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it allows faster, deeper communications.
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to, say, the development of AI? I mean, everyone talks about AI being the new oil or the currency of the future. So how does 5G relate to AI, or does it not at all?
Well, my understanding is digital technology comes with two pillars. One is semiconductor, which is hardware. The second one is data, digital signals. In other words, informations. So those two pillars support the whole digital technologies. And 5G is just a symbol of this technological system. If you don't have a super capable semiconductor, you cannot make a 5G equipment. And also, if you don't have a super nice algorithm of AI, you cannot manufacture the 5G equipment, a 5G system. So that's why I'm saying 5G was important, but it was just a symbol of the whole technological level of digital.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Okay, that's clear. So let's go back to your book and the geopolitics of this issue, because it seems to me there are several different risks that can potentially come out of this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the risk is, we witnessed the Chinese Communist Party's conference, which was held last week, and I think it's a Singapore media has broadcast all the videos, the pictures, movies of the scenery of the conference, and Mr. Xi Jinping now have a much stronger position in the party, and Hu Jintao it looks like this way, he was kind of ousted by the other the people in the conference room. So it was so shocking, wasn't it? So
Yeah.
China is such a nation, and Mr. Xi Jinping his position is as strong as ever. I don't know how long it's going to last, but the reality is the reality we have to face is that we are facing that nation, China. And the government and the Xi Jinping administration can govern all the technological development and the investment and even the digital data. So I don't really think this is a healthy situation. So risk is there, this speed of R&D. So eventually they will end up with having a huge amount of individual data, information, and it can be dominated by the China. That is what I'm afraid of.
So that's they become the AI superpower.
Yeah, that's right. Thinking about AI, everybody believes AI is smart, right? But where that smartness comes from, I just studied a little bit about AI, how AI works. As a system, I interviewed AI researchers here and there, and all they say, Yasu, AI is not smart. AI is just a black box. We don't really know how AI thinks about the issue. For example, if you ask AI whether this picture is a cat or dog, okay? So the AI might say, oh, okay, this is a cat. Right, correct, it's cat. And you show the next picture to AI, and the AI say, oh, this is dog. And you said, no, this is not dog, this is a cat. But by keep repeating this process, AI eventually becomes able to answer the correct answer. But we don't know how they think, how they judge it is dog or cat. Um, we don't really know how the AI judge cat or dog, but that means there should be a teacher who teaches AI and shows a picture, bunch of picture, millions or so, trillions of picture to the AI. So I think that's why we have to be concerned. There should be a teacher which is human. That means that the AI relies on the society where they are developed. Because if teacher has a ethics like murder is not so bad, sometimes it's necessary to keep the stability of nation, then that value will transfer to AI.
Mhm.
So that means the AI born in China or any other country, or AI born in Japan, AI born in Jakarta, can be different from each other. So the
Yeah.
different AI may give the different answer when it comes to the very crucial questions, such as, let's say, some criminal behavior. So how to judge the significance of this criminal action. So this all the judgment depends on the criteria of society. So AI is not automatic. It's not just technology. It's a reflection of human society. So
So there's a triple risk, in fact. I mean, we think about the economic risk of AI, we think about the security risks of AI, but what you're talking about really is values. that the
Yeah,
values of the culture that develop it will become the values that govern the AI. That's really interesting.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Do you, in your conversations with the people who are working on AI, when you first started talking about those conversations, I actually thought you were going to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, and I thought you were going to
Okay.
say that AI is not, it's farther off than we're thinking. Everyone's focused right now on AI, but in reality, you know, maybe the communications technology itself is still more important. Maybe robotics is still more important. I don't, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, really, but do you think that we're really on the verge of such major breakthroughs in AI that we need to be very, very, very concerned, or is it farther out there? Maybe we need to also be focusing on some of these other areas of technology.
Yeah, definitely AI is the one we should focus on, because we don't really know what's going to happen next. You know, I use Google in my house, and every morning the Mr. Google tells me that what I should do today, and sometimes he asks me my schedule and my preference, and he even asks my mood in the morning. So that means it's very convenient, you know. It's very supportive, but at the same time, I'm concerned that that means that Mr. Google knows everything about me, and so with that means my data, my information, flies to the server of Google. This is a really powerful weapon.
But your concern that you're raising is a very valid one that people are discussing all around the world, which is privacy.
Yeah.
But when we look at the development of AI, that's a very tricky balance to find, right? Because if you take the European approach to privacy, the big companies like Google will be somewhat hindered in their capacity because they won't have the ultimate access to data that say the Chinese would have with their companies, and therefore the Googles of the world would fall behind companies in China who would have the competitive advantage because there's really very little protection of privacy when it comes to data. So, do you see, how do you see the United States looking at these issues? Because on one side you have Europe, which is where they really have developed some of the strictest privacy controls. On the other side you have China, and the United States is sort of in the middle. Just tell me.
Well, it's a good point. Well, as long as we trust Google, so we can benefit the technology. But the premise is we trust Google, or at least we trust Google wouldn't do anything super wrong. That's why we keep using the Google. But Alibaba or Tencent or other Chinese major digital giants do the same, right? And even bigger scale. In the population of China is 1.4 billion, and US, Canada, Mexico, all the Northern America is around 5-6 billion. No, I mean 0.5, 0.6, half of it. And ASEAN has 0.6 billion, right? So which means China plus ASEAN means 2 billion. This major, huge chunk of data, if this data chunk is controlled by the Chinese limited number of digital giants, we can't really trust, you know, even though it is convenient. We don't know how they use the data because there's no clear regulation. In the US, democratic discussion is being made on Capitol Hill whether or not Google, who's governed Google, or the platforms. All the discussion is harsh discussions actually. It's taking place, but not in China. Basically, we think that the government and enterprises are in the same track. That's what I have a concern about.
So let's go to ASEAN for a second, because you mentioned you sort of put them in the China camp there, which surprises me. I mean, I know that lots of people in ASEAN use the Alibaba and Tencent, but they also use Google. So and this is like the ongoing problem for ASEAN. How are they going to remain non-partisan, essentially? So how do you see ASEAN? What do you see as ASEAN's role or position, sort of between?
That is extremely important point. I am a Japanese journalist, so I look at ASEAN, or look at China and the US from Tokyo. So when ASEAN is looked from the viewpoint of Tokyo, the most of the Japanese think this way. Okay, the ASEAN is being sandwiched between the China and the US. And the ASEAN is wondering which way they should go. And they think, they feel they have to choose one of two. So that's why the US and China is fighting over ASEAN. That is a picture that the Japanese people tend to have. But if taking a look at from the ASEAN itself point of view, the member state of ASEAN is very busy to survive. They don't want to be. They don't want to choose one of two, U.S. or China. It is risky to take one position. So, to me, ASEAN is extremely. The member states of ASEAN is acting very carefully and strategically. So when it comes to data, yes, ASEAN has a huge data population and business activity, which is an asset of ASEAN in terms of data value. So that's why the US, China, their company want to approach the huge data set. But that is strategically speaking quite advantageous situation for ASEAN. US is looking at ASEAN heavily. Like 10 years ago, not so many people in Washington, policymakers, know about ASEAN, what ASEAN is. But in like 5-6 years ago, they started talking seriously about ASEAN. So nowadays, the vice president or the ministers comes to ASEAN like every month. So this is good for ASEAN. So the big question is how well the ASEAN can sell this asset to major to superpowers and in order to keep the independence. So the big data, the population, and the high growth rate is asset, diplomatic asset of ASEAN to have the better position in the world, the geographic.
So in your book, you talk a lot about repositioning Japan because it's lost the front place in a lot of this technology, or the leading role that it used to have. And so I'm wondering, does ASEAN factor into that strategy that you propose?
Yes, definitely. When it comes to semiconductor industry, the name of countries comes to in their mind is US, China, Korea, and Taiwan, and maybe Japan. But don't forget ASEAN. Actually, Singapore is one of the biggest producer of semiconductor in Asia, and Malaysia, particularly Penang. So the Korea and Taiwan is famous for something called a foundry, which is manufacturers of semiconductor wafer with circuit on it. So to make the final product of semiconductor, you need to have the latter process after wafer making, like chopping the wafer into the small dices, and the packaging and testing and checking and the wiring. All that process is mostly done in ASEAN region, mainly in Malaysia. So the Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and plus Vietnam are the major player in semiconductor supply chains. So if we want to have the secured, safe supply chain of semiconductor, you cannot neglect ASEAN. You cannot just focus on Korea and Taiwan or Japan. You cannot just simply disconnect China out of it. So the question is how to include ASEAN in this supply chain system. That is what America is trying to do. So they're looking at the American US policy on the Indo-Pacific strategy and everything, or IPEF, the new framework of economic cooperation. It always says supply chain, safe supply chain, particularly on semiconductor. So that is the reason why US have attention to ASEAN. ASEAN has a facility right now and in the future. So when it comes to the Japanese policy, there's a huge movement here right now, particularly from September, October. It's such sort of fever of the old voice of semiconductor engineers. You know, in 80s or 90s, Japan has been the semiconductor superpower, right? And it's just defeated by Taiwan and Korea and China. So they feel how to say they're very angry. You know, the old boys, the engineers in 60s or 70s, they had a very experienced, very nice period of time in history, and enjoy the economical success, but now is a loser, and they want to revive. So this energy is really strong politically. So this enthusiastic power is sort of driving force of the industrial policy in Japan. So their way of thinking is like this: let's revive Japanese power of semiconductor with ASEAN, like this. But what Japan is trying to do, Japanese government is trying to do, is to reform the supply chain of semiconductor. And Japan has equipment manufacturers, and Japan has material components manufacturers for semiconductors. But only parts missing is fabrication. So what they're trying to do is to find a way to connect fabrication business somewhere in ASEAN or East Asia and the Japanese material equipment industry combined and make a sort of independent, secure supply chain.
ASEAN can benefit. I mean, those are high-paying jobs.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, as long as Japan gives investment in ASEAN and do some technological transfer from Japan to ASEAN. That would be good. But at the same time, ASEAN has to be neutral. The ASEAN has to have a strong tie with the US, and the Chinese market is still there, and the ASEAN is heavily relies on Chinese market, so cannot be decoupled.
So, as you were talking about ASEAN and semiconductors, you mentioned Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand. So why those 4 countries? And what about the other countries? What about the big ones like Indonesia and the Philippines?
Philippines has some production. I don't really think Indonesia is playing a major role in semiconductor industry yet. But what Indonesia has is the resource. It's not just about semiconductor. Semiconductor is basically made of silicon, right? Currently, but we are now stepping into the EV, electronic vehicle age, right? So, which means EV employs a lot of new type of semiconductors, and some of them, most of them, are not made of silicon, but new materials. And those materials are sometimes called rare metal, rare earth. And Indonesia is one of the limited number of countries in the world who produce rare metal, rare resources. And battery, which is necessary components for EV. Battery requires nickel. Nickel is the thing that Indonesia can produce as number 1 in the world. So the digital EV semiconductor, all the developed digital technological industry is now looking at Indonesia heavily. So talking about the current semiconductor technology, yes, Singapore, Malaysia has some advantageous position, and Thailand has a production. But in the future, because technology is developing so rapidly, so nobody can tell what's going to happen next year. So maybe next year there may be a totally different way of production of semiconductor, totally different materials.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I think this has been an amazing conversation, and it's gone on longer than we had planned. So
sorry, we don't
no apologies at all. It's because I mean there's so many interesting issues on this, and in a year let's do an update, because I'm sure, as you just said, things will have changed again by then. Everything's changing so rapidly, and we'll have a better sense maybe of what the outcome is of the recent Biden restrictions on exports, and how that's going to play out. So
yeah.
Any last words, or just a big thank you to you for sharing? I want to ask you, your book has been a bestseller in Japan, and it's already been translated into Chinese and Korean. So can you please write your next book in English?
Yeah, I should. Before doing that, I have to study English more.
Okay, well, Yasu, thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. Yeah.
And talk with you again soon. If you have any questions about the issues explored in this episode, email us at contactus@eria.org. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other streaming platforms so that you will be notified about future sessions.